Good evening from Jerusalem. I'm Laura Kam, Director of Communications at JPPI. The Jewish People Policy Institute is an independent center of thought and planning for shaping strategy and policy for the Jewish people in Israel and the diaspora. As such, during this time of real crisis and the beginning of a complicated and likely protracted war, JPPI will share on a daily basis deep analysis and insider views from on the ground in Israel. JPPI Senior Fellow Yaakov Katz, former editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post and author of numerous books on military strategy and geopolitics, will open and moderate today's discussion, followed by Shmuel Rosner, JPPI Senior Fellow, researcher and political analyst. Lahav Harkov, the senior political correspondent of Jewish Insider covering Israeli politics and diplomacy, and Gil Troy, also a JPPI Senior Fellow, historian, author, and prominent Zionist thinker. They, along with a rotating roster of experts, will communicate with you throughout the next days via this daily webinar and subsequent podcasts of the discussion for as long as the crisis in Israel continues. For our viewers, please ask your questions in the chat box and we will get to as many as we can. Finally, many individuals from abroad have asked us how they can directly help support Israel at this time. Contact us at info@jppi.org.il and we will get back to you shortly with relevant information. Yaakov, now over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Laura. And I want to thank again Shmuel and Gil for being with us, as well as Lahav for joining us today. I want to just give kind of a very high-level update of what's happening. You know, beyond the blood that is still boiling here in Israel, with everybody just disturbed by what happened here just 48 hours ago. I think what people need to remember is that here in Israel, we're such a small country, and when you have 1,000 people almost who have been murdered, killed in a murderous rampage by Hamas, another 150 to 200 who have been taken hostage, abducted by Hamas in Gaza. There's probably not a single Israeli in this country who does not know someone who was unfortunately, devastatingly killed or taken hostage. I think there's probably no one on this call right now among our panelists who doesn't know someone who's currently serving in the IDF, who's been called up, who's serving in the reserves. I think everybody on this call has either a child or a spouse or a relative who is definitely there. And we're going to talk about that because one of the big stories right now that's happening is the fact that 300,000 Israelis have been called up into the reserves. And just to give that a bit of perspective, I'm not good at math, but 300,000 is almost about 5% of our population. Right. The fact that you have about 4%, 5%, the fact that you have so many people who are currently serving in the military, I mean, it's unimaginable in any other country. But these people have all put on uniform and are now there fighting and serving their country to be able to, for this fight for survival. What's happening over the last just 24 hours, very quickly, Israel has been fighting to clear out those areas in the south. They seem to have done a pretty good job. With some confidence, the IDF now says that those pockets of Hamas terrorists who were still inside Israel, they hope that they were able to get most of them, and they're no longer inside Israel. Now the big push is into Gaza. What will happen there? And we're going to talk a bit about that with the consequences, the ramifications, and the impact of what a ground offensive inside Gaza will look like. But at the same time, as we keep one eye on what's happening in the south, we have to keep an eye on what's happening up in the north. And just as we speak, there are clashes that are taking place along Israel's northern border with Lebanon. There's a number of Israelis who have been wounded there. That is where Israel's biggest concern comes from at the moment. As we look to the north with Hezbollah, with all of its rockets and missiles, they're larger and far more sophisticated capabilities than Hamas has. Israel wants to try to keep this conflict contained. It doesn't look like that's what's happening at the moment. So maybe I'll start with you, Shmuel. And then I want to go to Lahav and Gil, but give me, if you can, very short, concise, 90 seconds. What's the big story that you've seen over the last 24 hours? What do you think our listeners and our viewers need to hear?
Well, I think the big story, at least psychologically speaking, is that Israelis begin to understand or begin to grapple with the fact that what happened in the last 2 days is not a story that's ended. In some ways, because it was so dramatic and traumatic, it seems as if today we can summarize it and say, okay, let's think about what happened in the last 2 days. But we ought to remember at the same time that this is not the end of a story. This is merely the beginning. As dramatic as it was, what lay ahead of us might be also dramatic, maybe even more dramatic than what we've seen. Hopefully, we will not see the same number of casualties on a daily basis because this will devastate the country. But looking forward to 2 or 3 or maybe 4 weeks of fighting in Gaza and in the north, that's something we have to get used to, the idea that as hard as it is, we need to put what happened behind us and look to the future, to what challenges we might face tomorrow and in the coming days.
Yeah, because this conflict, as you said, I mean, this is going to carry on for, unfortunately, for not days likely, but probably weeks, especially if we start to see a ground offensive in Gaza, and who knows what's going to happen in the north. Lahav, what is your big take on what's happening over the last 24 hours?
Well, I think that the big thing that everybody's thinking about is sort of how did this happen? I think that there's a trust issue and a sense of security issue for the average Israeli in the army and in the government that's just completely broken, shattered, maybe in a way that we've never experienced before. I mean, I think as it is, our public trust was at an all-time low because of our internal divisions. But, you think about the Yom Kippur War and the thousands of Israeli lives lost in the Yom Kippur War, and those were all soldiers. And these are people are not feeling secure in their homes, because they're thousands of people who were being slaughtered in their homes, and the army just wasn't there when they were supposed to be. And so I think that, sorry for the background noise. I think that when we look at what's going to happen after this war, I think that things are going to have to really change. Something is going to happen. The government will have to do something, say something, change something, and so will the army, in order to make people feel that they are secure in Israel again.
Let me just say for Lahav, and we're going to talk about this a little later when we get into the Miluim, the reservist conversation, but Lahav's husband was called up to reserves. So Lahav is a single parent at the moment, taking care of a baby at home, 3 kids, right, Lahav? So
yes.
We're going to talk about this later, but to our viewers, I'm sure you can all sympathize and understand what people are going through here. So Gil, let's go to you for a moment. The 90-second version of what is the biggest story that's taking place at the moment.
First of all, I want to say thank you, Lahav. That's the most beautiful sound I've heard all day. And it changes the mood, and it reminds us of who we are and where we're going, and that we will survive. I'm devastated because we just heard that one of my son's best friends is missing, Ben Mizrahi, and he's a beautiful Canadian-American boy who Israeli also, who is part of our family. And I think this is the day where people start hearing that second round and third round of who's missing. And he's Canadian. And I haven't heard Justin Trudeau call for him or for Vivian Silver, who's also Canadian and was kidnapped from Be'eri, to be freed. And I haven't heard the Canadian government say, wait a minute, this was a war crime. And we as Canadians, who are we if we don't stand up for our citizens and if we don't stand up for international law? So fortunately, I'm not just angry at the Israeli government today. I also have another government to be angry at. But the deeper issue is this, and the most exciting thing that's happened in the last 24 hours is I'm feeling a tectonic shift in the relationship between American Jewry, in fact, world Jewry, and Israel. I think Saturday and Sunday was a wake-up call. I think many people, especially who observed the 2-day holiday, were shocked. And we've been getting so many calls and emails and WhatsApps. How can I volunteer? How can I help? What can I give? This in many ways goes back to May 1967, when American Jews realized they had taken Israel for granted. And so many people who were super critical of Israel, were busy talking about imperialism and colonialism and supremacy, are putting that aside. And I think we also have to think in a very strategic way and a very loving way about how do we reframe the conversation, not to make anybody feel badly about their previous political position, but how do we incorporate this new information, this new realization of the barbarians at the gate, and move on and build a stronger partnership.
So we're actually going to talk a little later in this webinar. What can Jews of the diaspora actually do practically? And I think we have some really good people here who can give some maybe tips, right? The most obvious one that people always say is give money, right? But I think there's much more that people can do than just write a check. And I will want to get what you have to say, all of you. But I do want to talk and touch upon something. And Gil, I'm going to start with you on this one as well. The Miluim reserves. I mentioned before the 300,000. I've been texting all day with my brother, who's deployed, was drafted Saturday afternoon from his house in Herzliya, taken up north to the border with Lebanon. And I feel like that annoying sibling, I guess. He's 10 years younger than me, but every time I hear of a rocket from the north, a mortar shell, a shot fired, are you okay? Right? On Saturday night, I drove my daughter, who's doing her current compulsory service, but she's at what's known as Barrage, the officers training school. She's becoming in training to be an IDF officer, and she was called back, of course, early because of the war. And she's down there, and they've been out training throughout the day, the last couple of days, and getting ready to deploy somewhere. They're not combat, but they are going to be filling in for what combat soldiers did, guard duty, guarding communities and settlements throughout the country. That really shakes you inside in the kishkas when you drop off that kid knowing they're going out to do something. But I know, Gil, you have a story of your own son who was not in Israel when this all began. So let me just turn it over to you and just give us that personal story, but also kind of the broader experience as you see it.
My son finished 3.5 years of intensive combat service and cut his choger, as they say, cut his dog tags, August 15th. And so he was in Sri Lanka on Shabbat morning in a small Chabad with 4 men praying, and 2 Israeli girls came in and started describing what was happening. He went immediately for his phone and discovered that his unit had been called up. In fact, his unit was fighting. In fact, his unit lost 5 people that day in difficult battle. And through hook and by crook, he arrived last night at 12:50 a.m. in Ben Gurion Airport, a very quiet Ben Gurion Airport, which most of us just had. It was very interesting. It was like Israelis coming back, normal Israelis, looking very much like the people who were slaughtered in a very heartbreaking way. And just 3 hours ago, I dropped him up at his base. And 2 thoughts. One is that I learned a new expression from him: balagan of tormim, a cornucopia chaos of donations. We came with a car full of stuff. There were so many other people bringing towels and blankets and shaving cream and shaving and soap, because these people just stopped what they were doing and ran to the base. And we're seeing the nation, and it goes back, I think, to also what Lahav said, that I think in the failure of the government, in the vacuum of trust in the government, what we're seeing is the people of Israel standing up. And they're standing up through their miluim, through their reserves, and they're standing up, those of us who are in the home front, just in any way we can. And that's where also we appreciate the fact that donations are also starting to come both personally and more philanthropically from abroad. The second thing is the car lot was full. The car, in fact, the lot just worked its way all the way down to Mishor Adumim, where his base is. And it was a delightful expression of the clarity. And I have not heard of one pilot, one soldier who has refused to serve, because this is a war of what we used to call ein brera, of no alternative, no choice. And every one of the people who was protesting understood that you put your anger, you put your frustration, you put your critique aside, and you serve, because this is to defend our homeland. This is to defend ourselves. And if I may get personal, I gave him the Kohanic blessing, and I also said to him, I said, no guilt. I said, you do whatever you need. And I'm the nicest guy in the world, I like to think. But I said, you do whatever you need to do to survive, to protect yourself, to protect your people, your buddies, and to protect our country. And I hope he does that.
Wow, moving words, Gil, really. Shmuel, I want to go to you and get, you've done a lot of polling over the last 8-9 months. And there was a feeling here in this country, we all remember the pilot letter. We remember the Ser Makal letter, the Shaldag letter, the Ser Golan. Every unit was putting out a letter at some point that they're not coming to reserves. But as Gil just described, and we're all seeing these images, no one doesn't know. I mean, we're going to talk, Lahav will tell us in a moment about her husband, and I know you have kids who are serving also in the IDF. Are you surprised by this massive enlistment and draft without any no hesitancy, right? I mean, stories like Gil's son is moving, but it's happening all over, right? You have Israelis who are getting on planes wherever they can to come back to this country to fight. I got a phone call today from my brother. He's got somebody in his unit who's actually working in the Shabak. And he calls me, he says, Yaakov, do you have any connections in the Shabak? I said, why do you need connections in the Shabak? He said, because he wants to be released. They won't release him so he can come fight with us as opposed to sit behind a desk as an intelligence analyst. I said, sorry, that's where my connections kind of run dry. But I mean, are you surprised by what you're seeing?
No, I can't say I'm surprised. Israelis, one more time, Israelis proved to be much better than their government and their institutions. That's one of the things that we repeatedly learn or relearn about Israel. We have a government that's not always functioning, and we have institutions that often lack in abilities. But when the people are called to serve, and when the people are called to contribute their part, they do what's needed. And when we did the polling, I do not want to understate the importance of the polling in recent months. The polling was accurate. People did feel that the cup is full, and that they had it with the government and with certain processes, and they felt the need to say, we are not going to participate in the implementation of such policies. However, when what happened on Saturday was proof to Israelis that this time, whatever you might think about the government, this time it's not about the Israeli government. The Israeli government isn't the story. The story is that we have neighbors who would not hesitate to infiltrate our most sacred space, our homes, our living rooms. They will not hesitate killing mothers and children in their hands. They will not hesitate as they take elderly people, abduct them, and take them into Gaza. And when people fight for their most sacred space and for their families, they no longer do this calculation of do I support or do I oppose the government. They understand that this time it is a war for the home, and hence they come in droves to the military units, and we know that these units, when they called people up, the number of people who came in was more than 100%, meaning that such unit expects that out of 120 people, 100 will come. Well, this time all 120 people came, and people are coming from abroad. Israelis who visited the airport today saw empty airplanes leaving Israel and full airplanes coming in with youngsters wanting to join their units. Yesterday, there was a story about a young couple who traveled, I think, in South America. They came back in, two young Israelis drove from the airport to their homes, got married, and then the man joined his unit and the woman joined her unit like half an hour or an hour after they got married. So such stories, these are the stories that we hear these days. These are the stories that we are going to hear in the coming days, which does not mean that the people will not eventually want to go back to the political calculations. After the war, when the war is ended, I think Israelis are going to go back to this issue of politics, coalitions, government, etc.
Sure.
But right now, Hamas made us all unite, and You mentioned polling. We saw this in the polling as well. Several pollsters asked the question, how will this crisis, social, political crisis, how will it end? And many Israelis responded by saying, with war. When war comes in, unity will come back. And this is what we see today.
Unfortunately, that's true, right? But I wish there was a way that we could have unity without having to have war, right? If someone figures out how to invent that, they should definitely let us know. But you reminded me with that story about that couple. There was also a great story that I read of a father whose son was having his brit milah, right, his circumcision, and he was watching it on his cell phone in uniform as a miluimnik, as a reservist, and saying the blessings and naming his child through a Zoom call because he had to go into reserve duty. Lahav, I think that a lot of people outside of Israel don't know what this is like. And we see your very cute son who's joining us. Tell us what it is from your perspective of this, your husband going away, going off to war, your home, carrying the burden, the load. I mean, give us kind of the personal experience, but also on a cultural level, it's something unique for the state of Israel.
So first of all, I mean, you can sort of see it's going in and out because of this background, but you can see how this is affecting my work, at least. This is the only way to get him to not scream. But in any case, my husband does reserve duty regularly, and I have to, we have to figure things out. You got to shuffle the childcare, the who's doing pickup, but you usually know in advance. And when it's wartime, I mean, I just heard a massive boom outside my house. Anyway, when it's wartime, not only do you have no time to prepare in advance, I mean, it was the middle of Shabbat. Like we were like in synagogue, basically, when we heard what happened. And then he ran home to turn on his phone to figure out where he needs to go. And so it leaves me, and me and as representing so many wives and mothers who have to drop everything. The kids don't have school either. They're all home. And just focus on taking care of our kids, not just giving them the basic needs that they need to for every day. My kids are small, but also to make sure that they are handling this situation, giving them the mental support that they need, not the support that's required. Yes, exactly. Not the 9-month-old, but I have a first grader who understands that if her father gets called to Miluim in the middle of the day, I mean, she actually said to me, like, Abba can turn on his phone on Shabbat because you're allowed to break Shabbat to save lives. Like from the first moment, she understood what was going on. And I have to make sure that, she's not too scared, even while I'm making her sleep in the boys' bedroom, which is the safe room of the house. And so families all across Israel are experiencing this. I see it with my friends and with my fellow parents in the WhatsApp groups of our classes, that it's, across the whole country. And the government actually, one of the few places where I feel like the government is functioning somewhat okay is that they've sent the entire education ministry, every parent who has a child in the education ministry has received all kinds of resources, psychological sort of resources to work with your children so that they're emotionally okay.
Lahav, beyond for being now a mother at home with 3 kids, you are a journalist, a veteran journalist, an analyst, and with a specialty on politics. So can you give us some insight as you see it with these talks that took place today on the possibility of a national unity government, Benny Gantz's representatives and Bibi Netanyahu's representatives? How real is this? How serious? What are you hearing? Is this going to happen? I mean, personally, I could just say, I think it should. And I think probably most people here would agree. And I've seen your tweets, I've seen Gil's tweet. I mean, everybody has pretty much been saying this is what we need. Do you think it's going to happen?
I hope it'll happen. I think the Benny Gantz, for example, is very serious that he will do it unconditionally, basically. Others have set conditions, but really some of them are very basic, like conditions that you need to have a plan, like what is the goal of this war, and to state it publicly. That's something that Lieberman wanted. Others have more difficult conditions, like Lapid, who wants Bibi to get rid of the more extreme figures in his coalition, which is probably going to be harder for Netanyahu, but maybe worthwhile in wartime. So I think it could happen. I think Bibi is thinking to himself right now, I need to focus on the war, and after that, I'll focus on politics. Sorry about this, guys. But I think we need that unity. That it's, as Shmuel said. Sorry about this. Our leaders are being less united than our people. I think we should go to someone else for a minute.
Okay, Lahav, thank you. Sorry about that. I want to just remind our listeners and people who are attending here that they can also put some questions in the Q&A box. We have just a few minutes left, so there are some questions, and there's just a few here. We're happy to take them. But, you know, one of the questions that I'm seeing, Gil, has to do with what can Jews of the world, Jews in the diaspora, do on behalf of the state of Israel right now? What are their options? And what would you suggest if somebody calls you up and says, you know, is it buy vests or fleeces or food? What can they do?
First, I think it's an excellent question. It's an important question. Again, it's a very moving question because it shows that we really are united. And I should say I've gotten calls not only from Jews, but from non-Jews. Former students of mine, colleagues who are saying, this just crossed every line, what can we do? And I actually think it would be helpful for maybe JPPI or others to just put together a list of resources of places that would be helpful to donate. But I actually think I like two different kinds of donations. I like the formal, what I call philanthropic donations, where you write the check and you get the tax deduction and you know that they're going through certain, you know, proper channels, like the federations, which I think do excellent and holy work and are very important vehicles at this point of time. And I keep on telling people, make your donation now, but also remember 6 months from now or 3 months from now, we're going to need serious money for reconstruction of all the settlements that were destroyed, and all the lives that were ruined. But I also really like that personal touch. I like using through a rabbi's discretionary fund, or some people have simply been sending me some money through Zelle or Venmo, where then we go and we buy, and you feel like, yes, you know, I get a call from somebody whose unit is about to go down south and they don't have enough vests, they don't have this, and then you really feel in a much more personal way that you're making a difference. So I would urge people to be strategic and do a little bit of the formal philanthropy, because I think it's also important that we rack up those numbers in a very symbolic way, and very substantive way, but also get more personally. But that's only a small part of it. The wallet is a very small part. I want people's hearts. I want people's souls. I want people's minds. And I want people's spines. What do I mean? Most important of all, I think we need big hugs. I think we need love and understanding and empathy. And I spoke to a niece of mine who said, I wanted to come and will I be helpful? And I said, you know, in many ways, you're a nurse, you have certain skills, but simply coming and giving our cousin, who was in a safe room and was almost killed by invaders, just a hug from the family in Washington will be so meaningful. So the heart is a very important part. And let's be honest, there's been in the last couple of months, years, a conversation about the growing rift between American Jewry and Israel. The more we take this opportunity to unite, the better. That's the heart. Right. The soul is about understanding, which I think many of my American Jewish friends, left and right, are understanding, is the soul is understanding just how existential a crisis this is, how deep a threat this is, how ugly a day that was, and how we have to change the conversation. We have allowed outsiders to inject a whole vocabulary of disproportionate response and asymmetrical warfare and imperialism and colonialism and all this stuff, which is frankly a form of Western cultural imperialism, imposing Western ideas on a very, very small country, which is not colonialist, which is not part of an empire, which is certainly not racist, and which is embattled, and forcing us to play this game with a really evil enemy with both hands tied behind our back, and us nevertheless becoming the piñata of the world. And so we really have to get to a soul conversation about what does Israel mean? And what does it mean to be the only democratic country surrounded by people who not just hate you because you are, but also hate you because you're Jewish? The spine is, I think, both my Republican friends and my Democrat friends have to grow a spine and have to start saying to those people in their camp who either try to weaponize support for Israel, as what often happens in the Republican Party, or who are so anxious to make the squad happy or the progressives happy that they buy into the ugliness against Israel. No, I don't want support from the Democratic Socialists of America if I'm running a campaign for Senate or for Congress, if they also will condemn Israel with blood still staining the streets of southern Israel. So let's start saying no. Let's have some spine. And yes, we might lose friends, but we'll gain some self-respect. And I think that's really important because I think for too long, it's been the polarization in America has been so great. The need to kind of fit in has been so great that this generation has kind of lost its ability to say, no, you know what? This makes me mad. This is triggering for me. This isn't just a microaggression. This is a macroaggression. You've crossed every line. Now it's time to change things. And that also help with political muscle and all kinds of other things. But I think there really has to be a change conversation. I say minds, the fourth, because my generation and the next generation, and certainly the younger generation of American Jews, needs to go back to the books, understand who we are, why we are here, what Zionism means, and why we are in a difficult situation, and start using our minds to express the subtleties and the rationalities and the justifications for what we do, when we do it, and why we need to, at this point in the next couple of weeks, be very, very aggressive and very, very clear morally that we are doing the right thing in order to keep ourselves alive and keep our women and children and our boys and girls alive.
Let me just add, the answer that I always give people is, obviously people can donate to whatever they want, and there's a lot of good causes that I won't tell anyone what to do, but there's something very basic. Learn what's happening, get the information and the real knowledge, understand what Israel is fighting for, watch those videos, read those stories, listen to this webinar. It could be anything, right? But get the information and get the accurate information, because there are going to be a lot of lies that are going to be coming. There's going to be a lot of wrong manipulation of news. There's going to be fake news and people are going to make up stories. And the more you know, the better you can fight back. So that's really important. Shmuel, what would you tell people?
Well, I don't have Gil's big heart, so I'll just stick with the spine, and I'll urge people, American Jews or all other Jews, to be patient and to remember that Israel is the victim of this war, because soon enough, when Israel turned the table on its enemies, and this is what we mean to do, this is what our government and our military are expected to do, it will be easy for people to forget, or convenient for people to forget, that this started with an unprovoked, ferocious, barbaric attack on Israeli civilians and soldiers. In 2 or 3 days, when Israel keep bombing Gaza or Lebanon, if that's necessary, people will be quick to judge Israel for maybe overreacting or maybe reacting in a way that's not to their liking, or blaming Israel for these type of things. We know from previous experience, I'm old enough to remember wars starting in the 70s. We know that people lose their patience after a short time and suddenly lose sight of who's the aggressor and who's defending his country. And I would urge American Jews, I know that it's supporting Israel today on this Monday, that's easy. Supporting Israel 2 weeks from now, when the war is ongoing and things get tough and the enemy is crying foul and wants to make us forget that they all started this by infiltrating Israel, by killing innocent people, then it will become much more difficult. And I urge all Jews to brace themselves for this battle, because as I said at the beginning of our conversation, we tend to think about this event as if we are looking back and summarizing it, but we are really at the beginning of a very long story.
Yeah. Lahav, we'll finish with you. Question was, again, what can Jews of the world do for Israel? I mean, they could maybe send a babysitter that I'm just kidding about, but might be helpful. But no, more seriously, what would you be telling people?
I think, first of all, I agree with what's been said so far, that people need to show their solidarity, and everybody should think about their own skills and their own connections and how they can show solidarity with Israel, whether it's to write a letter to your congressman or congresswoman to support Israel at this time, to write an op-ed for your local paper, the local papers that still exist, or you know, whatever website, you know, or community that you're part of, or to just talk to people you know about it who it might not be on their radar. And the patience part is important because we all know how Israel is usually portrayed in the world media. The portrayal right now is relatively good, but it will get worse, because when there are more casualties in Gaza than there are in Israel, then everyone likes to do that math. And you know, you have to remember that Hamas attacked Israel. Hamas is killing babies, killing elderly people, kidnapping Holocaust survivors. As Shmuel said, this is going to be long. We have to be patient, and your support throughout the whole time is what we're going to need, not just your support in the first days.
Thank you, Lahav. And, you know, I'm going to wrap up, but I want to thank everyone for joining us on our second day of this webinar. We'll be back again tomorrow and through the week to try to give an inside story and an inside analysis of what's happening and talk about the issues that are really on people's minds, including the challenges that come with having spouses who are called away to miluim and to reserve duty, having to drop off children at a base at you know 3 a.m. or whatever it is, and say goodbye to them and give them that blessing like Gil did. But really to remember, as Shmuel said, that we're just at the beginning, and this is unfortunately a war that was forced upon Israel and has compelled it to fight to defend itself. And that is exactly what any country in the world will do. And that's something that we all need to remember. So thank you very much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again tomorrow. And like Laura started, any ideas, questions, comments, feel free to share with us. You have that email, and we look forward to hearing from all of you. Let's hope it's a peaceful night. Thank you.